I woke up on the floor of my room at Sunset Gardens Assisted Living in Phoenix, Arizona, with no memory of how I got there. The last thing I remembered was standing by my window, watering the small African violet on the sill, a gift from my son Brian when I'd first moved into this place 6 months ago. Now I was lying on the beige carpet, my head throbbing, my hips screaming in pain, and somewhere in the distance I could hear voices calling my name. The staff found me within minutes. The emergency call button I wore around my neck had automatically triggered when I fell. Paramedics arrived, asking me questions I struggled to answer. What day was it? Did I remember falling? Did I hit my head? Everything felt foggy, disconnected, like I was watching someone else's life through a blurred lens. At the hospital, they ran tests. A CT scan revealed I'd had a minor stroke, a TIA they called it, a transient ischemic attack. Nothing permanently damaging, they assured me, but serious enough that I needed to stay overnight for observation. They also discovered I'd fractured my hip in the fall, which would require surgery and weeks of rehabilitation. "Do you have family we can call?" the nurse asked gently, her hand warm on my arm. "My son," I managed to say, giving her Brian's number with shaking hands. "Brian Mitchell. He lives in Scottsdale." The nurse stepped out to make the call while I lay in the hospital bed, scared and alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Scottsdale was only 30 minutes from Phoenix. Brian could be here quickly. He'd come rushing through the door, worried and apologetic for not being there when I fell. He'd hold my hand through the surgery, make sure I had everything I needed. That's what sons did, wasn't it? 20 minutes passed, then 30. The nurse returned, her expression carefully neutral. "I spoke with your son. He said he's at work and can't leave right now, but his wife will call you shortly to discuss arrangements." The words didn't make sense at first. "He can't come? I had a stroke. I need surgery." I explained that to him. He said his wife would handle it. I lay there, processing this information while my heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Brian wasn't coming. My only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father left when he was 3, the man I'd supported through college and graduate school, the person I'd rearranged my entire life around. He wasn't coming to the hospital where his mother lay with a broken hip and a brain that had just betrayed her. My phone rang an hour later. Not Brian's name on the screen, but Amanda's, his wife of 8 years. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Helen, hi, it's Amanda." Her voice was brisk, efficient, the same tone she used when coordinating her children's soccer schedules or organizing charity events. "I heard about your fall. How are you feeling?" "I had a stroke," I said, my voice cracking, "and I broke my hip." "Where's Brian?" "He's in an important meeting at work. He asked me to call and check on you. The hospital said you're stable, which is good news." "Amanda, I need surgery. I need someone here." A pause. "Helen, I'm sure the hospital staff will take excellent care of you. Brian and I will visit once you're through surgery and settled back at Sunset Gardens." "You'll visit? I'm your mother-in-law. I had a stroke. Why isn't Brian here right now?" Another pause, longer this time. "Helen, we need to be realistic about our capacity to help right now. Brian's been dealing with a lot of stress at work, and the kids are in the middle of midterms. We'll support you, but we also have our own lives to manage. I'm not asking you to manage my life. I'm asking my son to come to the hospital while I have emergency surgery. And he will, once his meeting is finished. Helen, I don't think you understand how important this meeting is. Brian's been working on this contract for months. He can't just walk out." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. His mother had a stroke. A minor one. The doctor said you're going to be fine. Let's not be dramatic about this. We talked for a few more minutes, Amanda assuring me they'd cover any medical costs insurance didn't handle, promising to visit within the next few days, suggesting I might need to move to a higher level of care at Sunset Gardens once I was discharged. Her words were all correct, all reasonable, but completely devoid of the concern or compassion I desperately needed. When we hung up, I lay in my hospital bed and tried to remember when I'd become such a low priority in my son's life. When had I gone from being his mother to being an item on his wife's to-do list, something to be managed efficiently, but not urgently? The surgery the next morning went well, the orthopedic surgeon told me afterward. I'd need physical therapy, would likely need a walker for several months, but I should make a full recovery. Brian didn't come to the hospital that day, or the next. On day 3, he finally appeared, looking harried and uncomfortable, bringing flowers that Amanda had clearly chosen. "Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner, he said, not meeting my eyes. Work has been insane, but you look good. The surgery went well? I looked at my son, 42 years old, successful, well-dressed, essentially a stranger who happened to share my DNA. You couldn't come for 3 days? Brian, I had a stroke and surgery. I know, and I'm sorry. But Mom, you have to understand, I can't just drop everything every time something happens. You're in a good facility. You have professional care. Amanda and I have responsibilities. Every time something happens? Brian, I had a stroke. This isn't me calling about a flat tire. He sighed, that familiar sound of exasperation I'd been hearing more frequently over the past few years. You're being dramatic. The doctor said the stroke was minor. You're going to be fine. I'm here now, aren't I? But he wasn't really there. He stayed for 30 minutes, spending most of it checking his phone before claiming he had to pick up his kids from school. Amanda never came at all. I was discharged back to Sunset Gardens 4 days later with a walker, a list of new medications, and the crushing realization that I was truly alone in the world. Brian helped me get settled back into my room, or rather, he supervised while the facility staff did the actual work, then left with promises to visit soon that I already knew were empty. That night, alone in my small room with its generic furniture and view of the parking lot, I tried to understand how I'd ended up here. How had the relationship with my son deteriorated so completely that he couldn't be bothered to come to the hospital when I collapsed? What had I done to deserve this abandonment? Recovery was slow and painful. Physical therapy 3 times a week, learning to navigate my room with a walker, adjusting to new medications that made me dizzy and nauseous. The staff at Sunset Gardens was kind but busy, stretched thin across dozens of residents who all needed help. I was just another elderly woman recovering from a fall. Nothing special, nothing urgent. Brian visited once in the first month after my surgery, a Sunday afternoon stop that felt more like an obligation than a choice. Amanda came with him, along with my grandchildren, Tyler and Madison, now 12 and 10. The kids looked uncomfortable, clearly told to be on their best behavior around their injured grandmother. "How's the physical therapy going?" Brian asked, sitting stiffly in the chair by my bed while Amanda checked her phone and the kids stared at the TV I'd turned on for their entertainment. "It's hard," I admitted. "My hip still hurts, and the walker makes me feel so old and helpless." "Well, you are getting older, Mom. These things happen." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. I was 68, not ancient, and my stroke and fall had been medical events, not inevitable consequences of aging. But Brian spoke as if I'd simply worn out, become obsolete, something to be warehoused and occasionally checked on. "I miss being in my own home," I said quietly. My house, the one I'd raised Brian in, the one I'd lived in for 40 years, had been sold when Brian convinced me to move to Sunset Gardens. "You need to be somewhere with support," he'd said. "What if something happens and you're alone?" Now something had happened, and I'd been alone anyway, calling out for a son who wouldn't come. "Mom, we've been through this. You couldn't manage that house anymore. You're better off here where there's staff to help you." "But I'm not better off. I'm miserable here." Amanda looked up from her phone. "Helen, maybe you need to adjust your attitude. Sunset Gardens is a lovely facility. You have activities, other residents your age to socialize with. You're acting like we put you in prison." "I didn't want to move here. Brian, you promised I could move back home once I was feeling better." "I never promised that," Brian said, his tone sharpening. "I said we'd reassess. And Mom, look at you. You can barely walk. How would you manage a 2-story house? How would you cook, clean, do laundry? Be realistic." I wanted to argue, but the truth was he wasn't entirely wrong. I couldn't manage the stairs in my old house, not with my hip. I couldn't drive anymore. The stroke had resulted in my license being suspended, pending neurological clearance. I was dependent in ways I'd never been before, and Brian knew it. They stayed for 45 minutes before Amanda announced they had to leave for Madison's soccer game. After they left, I sat in my room and looked at the photo on my nightstand. Brian's high school graduation, him in his cap and gown, his arm around me, both of us smiling. Where had that boy gone? The one who'd written me cards saying I was his hero? The one who'd called me every day his first year of college because he missed home? My neighbor at Sunset Gardens, Dorothy, stopped by that evening. She was 82, sharp as a tack, and had been living in the facility for 3 years. "I saw your son visit," she said, settling into the chair Brian had vacated hours earlier. "He doesn't stay long, does he?" "He's busy," I said automatically, defending him out of habit. "They're all busy," Dorothy said with a knowing smile. "My daughter lives 10 minutes away. I see her maybe once a month. They put us here and forget about us, Helen. That's just how it is now." "It's not supposed to be like this," I said, my voice breaking. "I raised him alone. I sacrificed everything for him. And now I can't even get him to visit me in the hospital." Dorothy patted my hand. "The ones we sacrifice the most for often appreciate it the least. They think they're entitled to everything we gave them, never understanding it was a gift, not an obligation." Over the following weeks, as I slowly regained mobility and strength, I started paying attention to the other residents at Sunset Gardens. Dorothy wasn't wrong. The hallways were full of elderly people whose children rarely visited, who spent holidays alone, who waited eagerly for phone calls that never came. We'd all been warehoused, stored away in this pleasant but impersonal facility, out of sight and out of mind. I started documenting Brian's visits, or lack thereof. 6 weeks passed before he came again, this time alone, staying just 30 minutes before claiming he had errands to run. He never called between visits, never texted to check how I was doing. If I called him, it went to voicemail more often than not, and his return calls came days later, brief and perfunctory. Amanda, meanwhile, had taken over managing my finances, something I'd agreed to after the stroke when I was still confused and scared. Now, looking at my bank statements, I noticed money being withdrawn regularly. When I asked Amanda about it, she explained it was for care coordination and medical expenses, but the amounts seemed excessive, and when I asked for detailed accounting, she got defensive. "Helen, Brian and I are doing you a favor by handling your finances. You're in no position to manage this yourself. If you're going to question every little thing, maybe we should get a professional conservator involved instead." The threat was clear: cooperate or lose what little control I had left. I backed off, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. 3 months after my stroke, I was well enough to use a cane instead of a walker. My physical therapist praised my progress, and my neurologist cleared me to drive again once I demonstrated I could safely operate a vehicle. For the first time since collapsing in my room, I felt like myself again, diminished but still capable. I asked Brian if he could take me to the DMV to have my license reinstated. "I don't have time, Mom. Ask one of the staff to arrange transportation." "Brian, it would take you an hour. Please, I haven't asked you for anything." "You're always asking for something," he said, his frustration evident. "First it's visits, then it's help with errands, now it's transportation. Mom, I have a full-time job and 2 kids. I can't be at your beck and call." I hung up without saying goodbye, something I'd never done before. That evening, I called an Uber to take me to the DMV, something Brian didn't know I'd learned to do. The staff at Sunset Gardens had taught me, along with several other residents, recognizing that we weren't as helpless as our children seemed to think. With my license reinstated, I borrowed Dorothy's car. She couldn't drive anymore, but kept her vehicle in the parking lot just in case. I drove to Brian's house in Scottsdale, a sprawling suburban home in a golf course community. I hadn't been there in over a year, not since before I moved to Sunset Gardens. No one was home. Midday on a Thursday, Brian at work, Amanda probably at one of her committee meetings or tennis lessons, but something made me try the front door, and to my surprise, it opened. They'd never changed the key code I'd been given for emergencies. I walked through my son's house, seeing evidence of a life far more luxurious than I'd realized. The furniture was all new, expensive designer pieces. The kitchen had been remodeled with high-end appliances. Original artwork hung on the walls. In the garage, I found Amanda's new Mercedes. Had that been there at Christmas? I couldn't remember seeing it. In Brian's home office, I found what I was looking for, and what I wasn't. A stack of bills on his desk showed the truth of their financial situation. Mortgage payments far higher than seemed reasonable. Private school tuition for both kids, country club fees, car payments. They were living well beyond even their substantial means, but it was the folder labeled Mom's Finances that made my blood run cold. Inside were my bank statements, but also documents I'd never seen. A power of attorney I didn't remember signing. Applications for reverse mortgages on my old house before it sold. And most damning, a spreadsheet detailing how much money Brian and Amanda had borrowed from my accounts over the past 2 years. The total was staggering. over $200,000, taken in increments small enough that I'd never noticed, always explained as medical expenses or care costs that were actually just subsidizing Brian and Amanda's lifestyle. I took photos of everything with my phone, another skill the younger staff at Sunset Gardens had taught me. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it and left, my hands shaking so badly I could barely drive back to the facility. That night, I called my old friend Patricia, who I'd known since Brian was in elementary school. I told her everything: the stroke, Brian's refusal to come to the hospital, Amanda's cold efficiency, and now the financial theft I'd discovered. "Oh, Helen," Patricia said, her voice thick with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. But honey, you need to report this. They're stealing from you. He's my son, and he's treating you like an ATM with no regard for your well-being." "Helen, what happens when your money runs out? Do you think Brian is going to take care of you then?" I knew the answer. Brian had already made it clear I was a burden he tolerated rather than a mother he loved. Once my money was gone, I'd be even more disposable than I already was. I hired an attorney, Ellen Morrison, who specialized in elder abuse and financial exploitation. She was in her 50s, no nonsense, with kind eyes that had seen too many cases like mine. "This is textbook financial exploitation," Ellen said, reviewing the photos I'd taken from Brian's office. "Your son and daughter-in-law have been systematically stealing from you while positioning themselves as your caregivers. The power of attorney is likely forged. We'll need to verify your signature with handwriting experts." "What do I do?" "First, we revoke their access to your finances immediately. I'll have new accounts set up that they can't touch. Second, we file a police report for financial elder abuse. Third, we seek restitution for everything they've stolen." "Helen, this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Brian refusing to come to the hospital, about Amanda's dismissive treatment, about all the money they'd taken while leaving me in a nursing home, isolated and neglected. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." The process moved quickly once I'd made the decision. Ellen froze my old accounts and had new ones established. She filed a police report, which triggered an investigation, and she sent a certified letter to Brian and Amanda informing them that their power of attorney was revoked and they were being sued for financial elder abuse. Brian called 30 minutes after receiving the letter, his voice shaking with rage. "What the hell, Mom? You're suing us? After everything we've done for you?" "Everything you've done for me? Brian, you stole $200,000 from me while I was recovering from a stroke. You refused to come to the hospital when I collapsed. You warehoused me in a nursing home and forgot I existed except when you needed money. We didn't steal anything. That money was for your care. Then you should have receipts showing exactly how it was spent on my care." "Ellen will be requesting those in discovery. I'm sure you have them all, right?" Silence. "That's what I thought," I said. "Brian, I gave you everything. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I supported you emotionally and financially through graduate school, through your wedding, through the birth of your children. And the moment I needed you, you abandoned me. Then you robbed me, so yes, I'm suing you. And I'm pressing criminal charges." "You're going to send me to jail? Your own son? You stole from your own mother. If there are consequences for that, you earned them." Amanda got on the line then, her voice sharp. "Helen, if you pursue this, you'll never see your grandchildren again. Is that really what you want?" The threat was meant to intimidate me, but all it did was clarify how transactional our relationship had always been. "Amanda, I haven't seen my grandchildren more than a handful of times in the past year anyway. You've already used them as leverage to control me. I'm done being controlled." I hung up and sat in my room at Sunset Gardens, feeling stronger than I had in months. Yes, I was suing my son. Yes, I was pressing charges, but I was also taking back my life. The legal battle was messy and public, exactly as Ellen had warned. Brian and Amanda hired an expensive attorney who tried to paint me as a confused elderly woman being manipulated by my lawyer. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged power of attorney, the unexplained withdrawals, the spreadsheet detailing their theft, and most damaging text messages between Brian and Amanda discussing how to manage Mom's money to keep our lifestyle going. The prosecutor assigned to the criminal case was a young woman named Sarah Chen, who reminded me of myself at that age, determined and unwilling to tolerate injustice. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that elder financial abuse cases are often dropped because the victims don't want to prosecute family members, but the evidence here is so clear-cut. If you're willing to see this through, we can get justice." "I'm willing," I said. The trial took place 6 months after I first discovered the theft. I testified about Brian's refusal to come to the hospital, about Amanda taking over my finances while I was still confused from the stroke, about discovering the stolen money. Brian's attorney tried to make me seem incompetent, but my neurologist testified that I'd made a full recovery and was cognitively sound. Brian took the stand and tried to justify the theft as managing Mom's finances for her benefit. But when the prosecutor showed him the spreadsheet detailing how the money had actually been spent on private school tuition, country club fees, luxury vacations, his defense crumbled. "Mr. Mitchell, can you explain how a vacation to Hawaii was for your mother's benefit when she was recovering from a stroke in a nursing home?" Sarah asked. Brian stammered something about needing to reduce stress so he could better care for me, but even he seemed to know how weak it sounded. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: fraud, theft, financial elder abuse. The judge sentenced Brian to 2 years in prison and ordered full restitution of the stolen money plus damages. Amanda, as a co-conspirator, received probation and was also liable for restitution. I sat in the courtroom and watched my son, dressed in a suit, looking smaller than I remembered, being led away in handcuffs. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt sad. Sad for the relationship we'd lost, sad for the person he'd become, sad that it had come to this. But I also felt something else: relief. Relief that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life being exploited by the person I'd sacrificed everything for. Relief that I'd found my strength again, that I'd fought back instead of accepting the role of victim they'd assigned me. With the settlement money from Brian and Amanda, I moved out of Sunset Gardens. I bought a small, accessible condo in Tempe, close to Arizona State University, where I'd gotten my teaching degree 45 years earlier. It was 1-story, walking distance to shops and restaurants, with a small patio where I could grow flowers. Dorothy moved with me. We'd become close friends during my time at Sunset Gardens, and she jumped at the chance to leave the facility. We became roommates, sharing expenses and companionship, 2 women who'd been abandoned by their children and had decided to build new lives together. I volunteered at a local literacy center, teaching adult students to read, the same work I'd done before retiring. Dorothy joined a book club and took up watercolor painting. We hosted dinners for other residents who'd left Sunset Gardens, creating our own chosen family from people who understood what it meant to be discarded. Brian wrote me from prison, letters full of apologies and self-pity. I read the first few, then stopped opening them. Maybe someday I'd be ready to forgive him, but that day wasn't now. He'd shown me exactly who he was when I was lying in a hospital bed, and he chose a business meeting over his mother. Everything that came after was just confirmation. Amanda divorced Brian while he was in prison. Apparently, a convicted felon wasn't the husband her social circle found acceptable. She moved back to California with Tyler and Madison, and I never heard from any of them again. Part of me grieved the loss of my grandchildren, but I recognized that they'd been strangers to me long before the trial. On the 1-year anniversary of my stroke, Dorothy and I hosted a dinner party at our condo. Patricia was there, along with Eleanor, Carmen from my painting class, and 3 other women from our Sunset Gardens support group. We ate, laughed, toasted to second chances and new beginnings. "You know what I realized?" I said, as we sat on my patio watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky orange and pink. I spent 40 years defining myself as Brian's mother. Being a mother was my entire identity, and when that relationship fell apart, I thought I'd lost everything. "But you didn't," Dorothy said, squeezing my hand. "No, I didn't. I found out I'm still Helen, not just somebody's mother, but a whole person with interests and friends and a life that doesn't revolve around one ungrateful child. I wasted so much time waiting for him to call, to visit, to care. Now I'm filling my time with people who actually want to be around me." Patricia raised her glass. "To finding out who we are when we stop being what everyone else needs us to be." We clinked our glasses together, a circle of women who'd survived betrayal, abandonment, illness, and loss, and had come out stronger on the other side. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from the parole board. Brian was up for early release, and they wanted to know if I had any objections. I thought about it for a long time. The boy he'd been, the man he'd become, whether he deserved a second chance. In the end, I wrote that I had no objection to his release, but also no interest in reconciliation. He'd made his choices, and I'd made mine. I hoped he'd learned something from his time in prison, hoped he'd become a better person. But I didn't need to be part of that journey. I mailed the letter and went back to my life, teaching at the literacy center, tending my patio garden, planning a trip to Santa Fe with Dorothy. My hip still ached sometimes, especially when it rained. The scar from my surgery was a permanent reminder of the day I'd collapsed and my son hadn't come. But that scar also reminded me of what I'd survived, not just the stroke and the fall, but the betrayal and the realization that the person I'd loved most in the world valued me least. I'd survived it all and built something new from the ruins. On quiet evenings, I sometimes thought about that phone call in the hospital. Amanda's voice, brisk and efficient, telling me Brian was in an important meeting and couldn't come. That moment when I'd realized I was truly alone. It had been the worst moment of my life, but also, in a strange way, the beginning of my liberation. Because once you know you're alone, once you stop waiting for someone to save you, you realize you can save yourself. And that's exactly what I did.